So let's talk about mommy and daddy issues. Now, it's very important when I talk about mommy and daddy issues, when I just simply say that word, a lot of people, that brings up a feeling. It brings up a feeling of weakness. It brings up a feeling of whininess. But I really want you to understand that's not what I'm saying here. I'm not insulting somebody by talking about mommy and daddy issues. I'm not putting somebody down talking about mommy and daddy issues. It's just simply what I've found, and so many of the meetings that I've had with folks, and so many of the people that I've talked to, is that mommy and daddy issues are a really big problem. And I think what kind of makes the problem worse is because it is so belittled. Right? If you have a problem and other people agree that it's a problem, then it's very easy to come together and find a solution for the problem. A big issue, though, is if you have a problem, but then you feel sheepish because you feel the people around you won't support you with the problem, then the issue can be is that you can never, many times you don't get around to resolving the problem, right? Because if you have a problem, you have a legitimate problem. This is a legitimate problem. This is legitimately holding you back. But you don't feel comfortable talking with others. You don't feel comfortable simply expressing that it is a problem. Well, the whole thing, right? The whole thing with solving any problem is identifying what the problem is. If you refuse to identify, if you have mommy and daddy issues, but no, I can't have mommy and daddy issues. Mommy and daddy issues is a thing for children, and I'm not a child, so obviously I don't have mommy daddy issues. Well, then you run into a lot of big problems. And I've seen this with so many folks. Again, they get into jobs that they hate. I had a buddy of mine. It was so sad. It was so, again, mommy and daddy issues. It was so sad. She was such a lively and vivacious person. But her father really pushed her into going into computer science of all things. And she had wanted to be a theater major. She had wanted to be a theater major. Her father really pushed her so she could get a real job. And the results a number of years later was very, very sad. She was just a very sad, depressed, just not vivacious human being anymore. And the reason is you take this vivacious human being, you put them into a room, for 10 hours a day, tapping at a keyboard, and it kind of sucks away your soul. Now, why? Why did she go for computer science? It's easy to say, like, oh, money or this or that or the other, but I remember having the conversations with her. The reasons she went for computer science is what her father pushed her into, so therefore that's what she was going to do. And she may have had a good paying job, but she was a miserable human being. And I think this is something to be considering when you go about your life, and to think about how you got to where you are so that you can figure out where you're going into the future, and think about how these psychological issues, little psychological hang-ups, can be keeping you back. I think about this. One of the biggest stories I ever heard with mommy daddy issues. And it was a real thing. It was a real thing. I knew this woman years ago. So probably about 20 years ago. She was a family friend. And it was really interesting, just to show how much your parents really can screw you up, so it was about 20 years ago. She was a full-fledged adult. So I was in my 20s. She was probably in her 50s at about that time. And she had a very interesting life story. So she had been a teacher. So she had been a public school teacher, done that for a number of years. From that, had actually become a computer programmer. So became a computer programmer in the 90s, late 90s. So that did very, very well for her. And then wound up getting her Juris Doctor. So basically getting her doctorate in law. That's the degree you essentially need in order to become a lawyer in the United States. Not only that, but while she'd been getting her Juris Doctor, her mother had passed away. And when her mother passed away, her mother had been successful and had money, and so her inheritance was significant. Let's just say significant. It was an amount of money you could have simply put into a 401k, and literally that would have been your retirement plan. A very, very significant amount of money. And so it was very interesting because this was a woman who had been professional, who had all the things, right? We say that we want women to have. I mean, she had the technical skills. She had been a coder. She had experience as a coder. She got her Juris Doctor, which is basically one of the highest certifications, one of the highest degrees you can get in the United States. She had money. She had everything you think you want. She had everything that people imagine is required for success. And that was weird because when I met up with her a number of years ago, we sat down And it was the bizarrest thing because at that point in her life, again, about the mid 50s, she was basically broke, and was working as a greeter at something like a Walmart. Literally. Not even a joke. Not even a joke. Now you think about it. It's like, well, did she have a mental breakdown? Did she have a drug problem? Did she break her leg? What is the story here? That was my question because she was healthy. She was healthy. Her brain was there. She wasn't obviously addicted to any drugs or anything. And so I sat down with her one day, and we're sitting there having lunch. And I looked at her and said, I don't understand. And again, this is a woman that I knew. This is a woman I had seen this stuff, right? It's easy to say, oh, I've been a programmer, I've been this. But I had seen the results. At one point, I had seen when she had very nice things. And at this point in her life, she did not have those nice things. And so I sat there and I was like, can I ask you a question? Because again, me being me, what happened? You're a greeter at a retail store. Because again, this woman, I mean, again, I'm not saying she should be the CEO of some startup company. I'm not saying Pollyanna-ish that she should be some multi-gazillionaire or something like that. But the worst case scenario, she should be solidly middle class. Even if she had coasted at this point in her life, she should have been upper middle class. Again, remember, I mean, professional computer programmer plus a Juris Doctor. Again, this was in the early 2000s. On a bad day, she should have been making $100,000 a year. So I sat down and we were talking, and I said, I don't understand what's happened, what's going on. And she looked at me. She said, well, here's the thing, Eli. To be honest, my mother died again because that's how she got the inheritance. My mother died a couple of years ago, and the problem is that when my mother was alive, I never felt like I lived up to her expectations. I never felt like I lived up to whatever it is that she thought I should do. Okay, I looked at her. Okay. And then she said, and then when my mother died, I realized I never would have the opportunity to live up to those expectations. And she looked at me, she said, and honestly, I don't feel like I deserve any of this. I don't feel like I deserve to be successful in my career. I don't feel like I deserve the money. I don't feel like I deserve any of it. So as fast as money came in, again, when the money came in, it didn't go to drugs or something, gambling, something like that. But it's easy to spend money. If you don't feel that you have the right to have the money that you're getting, it can get spent shockingly quickly. You can spend $1,000 a night on a hotel room. Add that by a few nights and you go through a lot of money. It's very easy to go through it. And basically that's what she said. She said, I never felt like I lived up to my mother's expectations. And so that when she died, I realized I had lost any opportunity to ever live up to what she thought I should be. And I just don't feel like I deserve any of this. And that's a hell of a thing. That's a hell of a thing. We're not talking about a crack addict. We're not talking about a high school dropout. We're talking about a woman who had been a 3-time professional. Again, she had been a public school teacher. She had been a coder for many years, like something like a decade, something like that. And she had her Juris Doctor. And money, and inheritance money. And she was working as a greeter with basically no money in the bank because she didn't feel like she deserved any of it. And I think this is a big issue that a lot of people don't deal with. And that's one of the things with our society. Again, when I talk about mommy-daddy issues, people inherently, at least in the American society, they kind of cringe. The idea that an adult at 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, they're still being haunted by the issues they had with their parents. It's something that we just completely discount. And that becomes a problem. Because think about all the things. Again, like with your parents, getting pushed into a degree program that you didn't want to go into. I am not somebody that talks about passion in your career or your job. I don't believe in passion for your career or your job. You should have passion for your lifestyle, I think. Your job is essentially what pays the bills. But on the other hand, let's not take that too far either. I mean, you have to enjoy your job enough. Your job has to satisfy you. Your job should not be soul crushing. There's a difference between being passionate about something versus it not being soul crushing. And so if you're like my friend who, she got into that computer science program, not because she liked science, not because she liked computers, not because, right? It was weird. It was so bizarre to see it just crush her. But she did that because that's essentially what her father forced her into. Even as an adult, she couldn't really think of any other options, and so she did it. And so this vivacious, happy person ended up getting stuck in windowless rooms for half her life. That's kind of a sad thing. I think about that even with my parents. I think about that with my mother, right? One of the issues I had with math when I was growing up, I should not have been as bad as I was at math that I was. So I was horrible with math in school. I was horrible in math in school. Well, one of the issues is, again, with my mother. My mother was very anti-authoritarian for some reason. Probably one of the reasons I have a pet peeve against the whole anti-authoritarian thing. But she was very anti-authoritarian. Who are you to tell me what I should do? And to some degree, that's fine. But this bled over into things such as teachers. And so when I was growing up, I was told these stories about how she made fun of her math teachers, or how she thought about they would ask her a question, and she thought about the problem in a different way and came up with a different solution, and they weren't smart enough to realize how good her solution was. Well, the problem with this was, again, especially telling this to a kid, is when I took math classes or science classes, I got it into my head to essentially reinvent the wheel every time I took a test. So instead of just learning the way that you're supposed to do it, this is the way that you're supposed to do it. So learn how to do it and then replicate, right? Instead of that, every single time, I just had it in my head. There was this mentality of always. And that really screwed me up. I mean, in high school, that's one of the reasons I was so horrible in math and science. I just simply refused to memorize how to do it. And one of the reasons was, again, with my mother's kind of anti-authoritarian bent, that whole, look for the different way, right? Do algebra. Do algebra. When you learn how to do algebra the proper way, then figure out the new ways you might be able to do it. But learn how to do it the proper way first. But this is one of the things that really damaged me again, at least for me with math. And so these are some of the things to be thinking about. I hear about that with, there's an interesting thing in psychology where some people, especially men, especially boys, they put their fathers onto pedestals, right? So the idea is your father is this absolute hero. Well, something to be thinking about is, if your father is an absolute hero, can you ever surpass an absolute hero? And you think about this, it's kind of weird to think about, but imagine this, right? So your father is amazing, strong and smart and all those things some kids think their fathers are. Well, then you become an adult and you go out there and you get your degree and you get work and you start making money. And one of the questions then becomes, what happens to your view of your father if you start doing better than your father? Right? What does that say about your father? And what does that say about your respect to your father? So let's say your father went out there and did whatever, I don't know, worked in the factory, did something, worked 50 hours a week and was a good father and all this. And then imagine if you had the opportunity to literally make twice the amount of money that he did for half the amount of work. Is there a psychological disconnect that makes you think, I don't know if I could do that? Because again, if I can make twice as much as my father, but my father was great, if I'm making that much money, what does it say about my father? I don't want to disrespect my father. So then do you not take that job? I think about this with a buddy of mine that I had. It was very interesting. I did this thing called DECA, Distributive Education Clubs of America. And basically it was an entrepreneurship vocational program in the high school. And so one of the things we did is we went off and we had competitions. So we'd have state competitions, and if you're good enough, or you knew how to get through the system, you went to the national competitions for all kinds of weird things, how to sell stuff, and interview processes, that kind of thing. But I had a buddy of mine. I knew him for a number of years, going to the state competition, and he had started a landscaping business when he was like 16 years old. Because again, we're all trying to figure out how to make money. So I was selling candy and doing flea markets, which apparently was the wrong way to go, and he decided to do landscaping, which apparently was the right way to go. Again, you can have two people working very hard, and one of them makes a lot of money, the other not so much. But anyways, and that was the thing. So I met him. I met him at the conference. Like, oh, yeah, how's it going? How's that landscaping thing going? And he started talking about how amazing it was. He was talking about how much money he could make for literally planting a tree, right? So if you buy a tree, simply plant. He said, I think at the time, this was back in the 90s, he said he could charge like $200 literally just to plant a tree. And it was amazing. Basically, he was talking about it was just money for, again, if you're willing to put on your boots, your mudding boots, and go out there and do it. Back then, especially, there was a lot of money. We were sitting there and we were talking about it, and we got to a weird point in the conversation. He's like, yeah. So last year I made $70,000. So again, think about this. He's a 17, genuinely, he's a 17-year-old. He's not playing any games. He's just going out there planting trees, planting shrubs, planting grass seed, whatever else. He made $70,000 back in the early 90s. And he was in high school. So he was still in high school while he did this. I was like, wow. But he had this look on his face. What could possibly be bad about making 70 grand when you're 17? Wow, what am I missing here? But then he looked at me and he said, yeah, but Eli, I made twice as much as my mom last year. So again, you think about this early 90s, again, $35,000 a year plus benefits, that was a middle class salary in the early 90s. And he looked at me and said, I'm 17 years old and I made twice as much money as my mom last year. And it just brought up so many just weird existential questions to him. Did he deserve that money? Why the hell is his mom making so little, right? There's all of this weird stuff. And I think that's something that people discount way too easily. That there are a lot of folks out there. I mean, think about that. If you were 17 years old and you could legitimately make twice as much as your parent, legitimately, there's no scam to this. There's no whatever. You could just go out there and you could literally just plant trees and make twice as much as your mother. How many people would not do that because they just could not psychologically handle the concept that they're in high school and they earn twice as much as their parent. That it just kind of just fry their brain. So these are some of the things to be thinking about when I talk about the whole mommy-daddy issue thing. I know when I throw this out, when I talk about this in other videos, a lot of people laugh about it and think it's a joke. But it really is a big problem, depending on what your parents pushed you into, depending on whether your parents were easy on you or hard on you, depending on whether you're underachieving compared to your parents or overachieving compared to your parents. It's amazing how much this gets into people's brains, and it really, really, really does screw with them. And that's the whole thing. And imagine if you sit down, you have an advisor meeting with me or a mentorship meeting with me, and we're sitting there trying to talk about how to make your business more successful. What does that advice matter if you refuse to earn more than your parents? Right? If you put your parents on a pedestal and you can't imagine earning more than them, and we sit there and we explain exactly how to do it, and then you can't follow the directions, then the advice, the mentorship doesn't matter. Again, if you come down and sit, and I've had people come and they sit down and they talk with me and they're like, Eli, how can I force myself to enjoy programming, coding? And it's like, what? It's like, I hate coding. Eli, I want to be a coder. I've had this. Eli, I want to be a coder. Oh, okay, fine. But I just can't pay attention to coding. I just can't do it. Eli, how do I do it? Well, sit down and you do it. Again, we can have a conversation about whether you should learn Python or Java or Swift, what kind of IDE, the developer environment that you should use. We can have a huge number of discussions about how to make coding easier or which programming language is best for what you're trying to accomplish. But if you just sit down at a computer screen and you blank out, no amount of advice from somebody like me is going to do anything for you. So, there's just something to think about. Just sit down, think about that with your parents. Did you get away scot-free? Did you get away as scot-free as you imagine? And if you didn't, think about the burden that you're carrying because of whatever happened with your parents. And then possibly before starting that business or really getting deep into the career, possibly think about just how to get that burden off of your shoulders. What is it that you really want to do? What is it, again, not that you're necessarily passionate about, but you'll wake up every day and do it. I know so many people that have made so much money off of the most absurd things. I know people that made a lot of money in technology. Don't get me wrong, there's a hell of a lot of money to make in technology. But I also have a buddy of mine making 70 grand when he was 17 in high school. Again, there's people making money off of all kinds of stuff out there. So if you're trying to go every day to just a job or do something and you can't focus on it, you can't pay attention, and you don't want to learn any more about it, and you don't want to get any better at it, then the bigger issue is, okay, let's figure out where you should really be going in the world. Let's figure out what burdens, what psychological baggage that you have that you may not realize you have, and then move on from there. So that's what I talk about with mommy daddy issues. Because it's true. And it's true. And again, especially right now, hashtag Me Too movement, the whole trying to get more women into technology. If I have any women watching this, think about that story. Think about that story, because that was a real story. That was a real 50-something-year-old woman who had really had something like a decade experience as a coder. She was a coder. She had experience as a coder, made good money as a coder. She got her Juris Doctor. She had money. She had money in the bank till she spent it all. And the thing that held her back, wasn't all the stuff we're hearing right now. It's not all the stuff they're talking about right now. The thing that held her back was she never felt like she lived up to her mother's expectations. And when her mother died, she just literally, in her heart of hearts, felt like she did not deserve anything that she had. How the hell do you fix that? So anyways, there are some thoughts for you for the day, and I'll see you all at the next video.